How do we know what's really happening? Many of us rely on news programs, social media, uh, various outlets to get our information. But how do we know what's really happening? The only true way is to be there in the moment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations for the People with Matthew Solomon. I'm Matthew Solomon, and I'm really excited to have Chuck Modiano on the show today. Chuck is awesome. He's a legend. He's always in the streets, interviewing people, capturing footage, getting to the core of what is really happening in the moment. Chuck Modiano is a DC based social justice and sports media journalist dedicated to exposing power, policing, and fascism. He covers local and national protests with a focus on amplifying media ignored voices. His notable his notable coverage includes DC anti-war and free Palestine protests, mass uprisings in Ferguson, Baltimore, Standing Rock, and DC, and exposing white supremacists. He is for the people, he is with the people, and I'm so excited to have Chuck Modiano on the show. So please welcome to Conversations for the People, Chuck Modiano. All right, Chuck Modiano, welcome to Conversations for the People. It's really great to have you.
Hey Matthew, great to be had over here. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's so like just for the folks that are watching and listening in, I had the honor of meeting you probably a little over a year ago. I think it was like
Yeah.
July, like over a year, over a year ago at the Montclair screening of Reimagining Safety. And you and I connected. We were on the panel together. We've had a chance to, stay connected since then. I always see you out in the streets. I'm always seeing videos that you're posting. I want to get into that. But it's just really great to have you here and to be able to like just talk and share you with the folks that are watching and listening in.
Yeah, well, you probably remember me because after I watched your film, I was effusively praising you and praising the film and the work that you did and making maybe ideas that might seem radical to people on the surface, make it plain, make it understandable, make it digestible to people who might have an arm's length when we're talking about things like defunding the police and what are we going to do with those funds and we'll put them elsewhere. So I really loved your film, and I really think everybody should watch it
Mhm.
to really understand what is behind this movement.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do remember, um, yeah, there was something where you were like, yeah, I have Alex Vitale's book, End of Policing.
Yeah.
Olayemi Olurin was on the panel, and you were saying, and now I have this film, which was really, really what I wanted. I wanted it to be something that could be used as a resource. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, and I've read Alex's book, right? Then the
Yeah.
policing, and I know the work of everybody on the panel, but there's something about film. We're fundamentally a little bit lazy. We don't read books like we used to. But even if we do read a book, a film is so much more powerful. A 2 hour film, a 1.5 hour film, an hour film is so much more powerful, which is why I, interview people on the streets through film. Particularly in this day and age where like the written word is going by the wayside.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love because what you do is so immediate. Like you're literally, in the street, talking to people, capturing footage, telling stories in, short clips and everything. And so how would you describe what you do?
I feel like I'm in a long tradition of movement journalism. Some people call it emancipatory journalism, that has a long history in America and elsewhere, but isn't really taught in our schools. And that type of journalism, that there's certain issues that there's just not two sides to, and that the problem with most journalism, as we see in corporate America, particularly in these times, is they have a position, a subjective position. They favor power and privilege. When there is a war going on, they invite a general to talk about it. Or if there's a political issue, they invite politicians to talk about it. And if there is a policing issue, they invite the police to talk about, people of power, people that we know are liars. I don't, you've covered in your documentary, police are professional liars.
Mhm.
And what does the media do? They are police stenographers. They take their statement that we know they're lying, and we know they're lying because every time video comes out after someone is killed, their lies exposed. We know George Floyd, quote unquote, died of medical injuries. Nothing about a knee or Derek Chauvin that was on his neck for 9 minutes. We know Walter Scott went to grab a taser until the video came out and we realized they fabricated an entire report, which was conspiratorial, including their partner and the department. And when the video came out, he didn't grab any taser, he was running away. And you could go down a long list. When the video comes out, we understand police lie. So if you understand police lie, why would you cover those people? On the flip side, I engage in movement journalism, and we interview people who are marginalized, people who are impacted by oppression, the family of someone who was killed by police. Let's hear from them. Why is the police officer more valid than the family? And there's a long, rich tradition in America, but it gets really shut out of journalist books. And I always tell people my historical spirit is Ida B. Wells, who never said that there were two sides to lynching. Ida B. Wells was there to educate white people about what was the horrors of lynching, okay, almost single-handedly, and was doing that for decades to expose what lynching was really about. And you could go back to Frederick Douglass in when he worked at the North Star. He didn't say there were two sides to slavery. He said slavery was wrong. I'm going to educate you about this. And so, whether you're talking about slavery then or lynchings then, or you're talking about the explosion of mass incarceration now, which is neo-slavery, or if you're talking about police terror now, which is neo-lynching, you're talking about genocide now, they're not two sides to these issues. We have a well-documented genocide. I am not trying to get Netanyahu's opinion on what is happening or a police officer's opinion. So we know we have a history here, and the history is based in truth and in justice and moving forward in that spirit. That doesn't mean that you don't want your facts to be correct. You always want your facts to be correct. But understand, we're coming from a rich tradition of amplifying voices who are unheard.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's one of the, so I don't know if you know this about me. I have a background in conflict resolution. So, I've made films and then I got into conflict resolution and then I thought I was done with that, once I went back to school.
Yeah.
And then this documentary kind of came about uh, in the course of my master's program in public administration. But in my conflict resolution work, the thing was, and this is from, whether it was Me Too or Black Lives Matter or, any number of things, or Palestinians, right? It's like the people who are most at the effect of what's happening, those voices are the ones that need to be amplified because otherwise it's the people in charge who are causing the harm who get to say what's working and what's not working or what we should do or what we shouldn't do. And that's incredibly frustrating, especially in the past year with the genocide that's happening in Gaza, and there's multiple genocides, but in talking about like the media coverage and who they have on, it's been incredibly frustrating the last 4 years, with George Floyd and Tyree Nichols, and the list goes on and on and on. And so I appreciate you pointing that out, and I feel like we can't say it enough because like we were talking before I hit record, like Ta-Nehisi Coates has been in the news
Yeah.
and he was on
Yeah.
MSNBC and he got to say his bit, but then as soon as he's gone, they go back to like the same old propaganda.
They do go back to the same old propaganda. Though, as I said to you offline, I think all the millions of protesters in the streets have to take credit for allowing Ta-Nehisi Coates to get that invitation. He's not getting that invitation last year. The protesters
Yeah.
forced the issue. The protesters in the streets by the thousands and millions who are having disruptions all over college campuses forced mainstream media to cover it. And now, if you're having someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates invade liberal spaces, I think that's another win because we always want to expand and radicalize as many minds as possible. And I use radicalize really loosely because the real radicals are the people who are promoting genocide, supporting genocide,
Yeah.
complicit in genocide. I don't even like to look at what's happening right now through any political lens or people say left or right. Since when is genocide a political issue, right? I mean, Hitler committed genocide. I think we could all agree was bad, no matter what your politics is. And now they're trying to politicize it to make it sound like it's a quote unquote far leftish. What does that mean? Killing babies? No, we have international law. We have a Geneva Convention, and we all know this is wrong. And you talk to a 5-year-old, they're not saying I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm an independent. Yeah, killing is wrong. And somehow by politicizing that, you get away from the most obvious war crime imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I mean, I love what you do. How did you get to this point? What got you started in journalism? What was the process that got you here?
So, I mean, I've done a lot of sports writing as well, but in this particular facet, I think I don't like how the protester is criminalized. When I went to protests, I saw the most intelligent, the most well-informed, people passionate with the highest level of conviction that I've ever met. They're the best people you will ever meet are at protests because, I'm also fascinated with the distance between the couch and the street because there's a million people who might agree with you like in principle, but they won't fight for it, right?
Mhm.
And but the people in the street they're fighting for it. And I'm not suggesting that's the only way. There are many other ways. You're a filmmaker. Matthew, we don't need you to be in the street. We need you to be making films, right? So I don't want to make it sound like, being in the street is the be all end all. It's not. There are many ways to help. But for me, the protester is criminalized. If you, and not just on Fox News, but all over.
Mhm.
And so around when Trayvon was murdered, I started covering protests in both DC and New York, but with a camera this time. I had been in protests before. I went down, my wife and I went down to the Genocide 6 back, I think it was 2007, for those who know what that was about. But I started asking people a very simple question. Why are you out here?
Mm.
And I still ask this, it's my opening question. I don't have any set of questions. It's a blank canvas. Tell me why. And on some level, there's a thread that every answer is the same, like, duh, genocide is going on. But on some level, every answer is a little bit different because somebody has their personal reasons. And that could go from, particularly in the protests now in Free Palestine, I'm doing something a little different. I'm saying, how's your family before I'm even doing the protest? Because one answer is my family just got killed in Lebanon. That's a real interview. I'm not making that up. I did that interview last week. There's the
Yeah.
tears in her eyes. My family just got killed in Lebanon. That's real, right? That's something different, and it could be that deep, or it could be a whole myriad of answers, depending on who you're talking to. If I'm a I'm Jewish, and like most Jewish people, I realize I've been lied to. Almost every Jewish person of a certain age has a self-discovery. Mine was in 2014 when I covered the massacres, the protests after the massacres in 2014, when 1,500 Palestinian civilians were killed versus only 6 in Israelis. And I started to seeing that there really were both sides here. And I started going out. But if you talk to a Jewish person, it's very interesting to hear, hey, when did you realize that you were lied to? And that's a very different introspective conversation. And it could be all over the place. So if you're covering the George Floyd protests, that's not a hard one. You see the video, it's outrageous, and you come out. But that question opens up a door, and then the person is going to say something very interesting. And I never know what my second question is, but I'm going to follow up on the interesting thing that they said.
Yeah. Wow. All of that. I didn't know you were Jewish, by the way. I am
Yeah.
also, and it's been that process. And I actually was talking to somebody. I taught, well, there's not a lot of Jewish people that were in my sphere, you know,
Yeah.
like friends and family that I can talk to
Mhm.
anymore. And that's been a whole other thing to deal with. But I was talking to a friend who's not Jewish, about like the whole process and realizing the lies, right? And then
Yeah.
studying American history and waking up to how we've been lied to. And then, so it's so interwoven and so connected. Um, the only difference for me is, I've said it's easier to divest from whiteness and to get uh like to decolonize, in terms of white supremacy. Being Jewish, it's been a lot harder because my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. There's that
Mm,
generational trauma thing. And then there's the wait, my survival is tied to Judaism, even though I haven't been practicing, for however many years, but
yeah.
there's still that like deep inner thing where it's like, oh, I'm not safe now, by being
Right.
outside of that.
Right. And it's something to work through. So I know you're interviewing me, but I'm going to go to my default and interview you for a second with your permission.
Yeah, of
So
course.
when did you know that, okay, maybe what I was taught isn't the truth? When did
Yeah.
you know? I mean, I'm someone who never knew a Nakba existed. I just
Right.
thought we went and had a kibbutz on this beautiful empty desert land and
Hmm.
settled there. It's only in the last 10 years that
Yeah.
I learned there was this thing called a Nakba, and Palestinians were murdered. So, like, my education is a long time coming, and that's one of many, many things. But when did you start to realize that you've been, I don't know, lied to, I guess?
Yeah, well, it was a couple things, and I went to Hebrew school, and all of
Hmm.
my teachers were Israeli, and had been
Hmm.
in the IDF, and it was that we're the chosen people. Everybody felt sorry for us because of the Holocaust, and
Hmm.
they gave us this little strip of sand, right?
Yeah.
And there was never any like, oh, there were people there. There was never any discussion of that or what
Yeah.
happened. But it was once we were there everybody, all the Arabs around us hated us and attacked us. And so we had to fight back 10 times stronger, and God was on our side. So that's why we took more land. And it's for our safety and it's them, like all of that, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a point at some point in my like mid to late 20s where I had heard that it wasn't everybody just gave Jewish people the land of Israel because they felt bad because of the Holocaust, but that it was actually a land deal and it was a strategic thing. And not only was not everybody on board, but there was a movie called The Chosen that I think was in the 80s,
Hmm.
about a Hasidic family in New York, and then there was an Orthodox family, and there were protesters. There were Jewish protesters protesting against the establishment of the state of Israel, and like that blew my mind. And then the land
Right. You
deal,
didn't know that existed, right?
yeah, it's like what? There were Jewish people that were opposed to that. That's so
Yeah.
weird, right? And then in my early 20s, I was working at a music store. I was a musician. I was working in a music store. And one of the guys that I was working with was a born again Christian. And we would get into these, I don't want to say debates, but discussions about who's right, because in my mind, we're the chosen people. So we have to be right. And he was like, yeah, but you haven't accepted Christ. So you're not like saved. And I was like, but what do you mean? And so, like, that got me really in the frame of everybody thinks they're right and there is no right or wrong, and it's all kind of like there is no like I was trying to find what is the absolute truth regarding religion, and that brought me to, well, it's all made up, like there's really no
Yeah.
absolute truth. So that was really the big start of it, and then it's been a process since like my mid 20s to now. I'm 51, so like 30 years of
Yeah.
you know and then all of that with policing and racism. Like I knew racism and disproportionate policing was a thing because growing up in LA, and I had the benefit of going to very integrated schools, so my friends were everybody, so we knew what was going on. But it was Rodney King, and
Yeah.
then for
True.
Trayvon Martin, like you mentioned, to happen 20 years later, or yeah, I think it's 20 years later. And it's like, wow, we're still doing this. And then George Floyd, 10 years after that, it's like, wow, we're still doing this. So yeah, that,
Yeah. And then not only are we still doing this, but the number of police officers killing civilians has actually gone up.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because it's so awesome. There's a video that's been circulating, and it was at a pro-Palestinian protest, and there was a black man who was yelling at the police, something to the effect of, "You're on the wrong side of history. You don't have to be doing this. We're standing up against genocide." And it was going around. I was like, this is awesome. And then I realized that you filmed that. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, I would love to
that's
know.
everywhere, by the way. So many people have taken that video.
Yeah,
And you know, I the way it was at the debates in Philadelphia,
right. That's right.
and you know, basically the police cleared everyone out. I mean, they were just out of line, and the purpose was to stop the protest. They were violent. They pushed everyone. They hit everyone. And then I see that man. His name's Joe James, and I he's talking to the police. Everyone's cleared out, and you could see in the picture, and it's posted on my Twitter. I kept it up there. Um, we do an interview, and then he sort of turns to the police mid-interview and telling them about themselves. We're just trying to protest the genocide. And really, anything I say is not going to do it justice if you see the video. And you're stopping us. Instead, you're protecting a genocide, and you're punishing the people who are opposing a genocide.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're criminalizing. And then he just starts going off on the police and how they're just tools of the state. You don't, and I asked the question, I said, you know what, why are they out here? And he just said they're robots, something that affect they're robots. They just do what they're told. And then they go home. They don't even think for themselves.
Yeah.
And they do what they're told and they go home. And it really resonated with a lot of people, because what it did is it tied also, besides his passion, besides his courage to talk to 50 police officers there who were not responding back, by the way. And I think more listening to him, actually, a few were listening to him.
Mm.
It tied the policing in America to the genocide that they're defending.
Yeah.
I mean, when he really tied that together, we know why we're here. He said, we're here to oppose a genocide. Why are you here? Why? And then he said, anybody? And they wouldn't respond. So I mean, it was one of those, moments where sometimes, you do videos and sometimes things blow up and you have no idea. And other times, things you think will blow up don't. Right away, I knew this one hit a chord. And yeah, so his name's Joe James. You can find him on Instagram. He doesn't have really a presence on Twitter, but he spoke for a lot of people. And I think the most beautiful things you get in comments, and part of why I do what I do, is I can't tell you how many people saw him and said, this gives me hope.
Mm.
I've been feeling down. This gives me hope. I got hope in the young people. Because there are a lot of people who just don't know what to do. You see the beast of the empire. You see what police could do. You have a genocide going on in broad daylight, live streamed with incontrovertible proof, and they're still doing it and lying to you. You have police killing people and not being held accountable, not getting a paid vacation. You're like, what am I going to do? So you have a lot of people who are really dispirited. And, you're interviewing people, and it gives not only other people hope. I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest, it gives me hope.
Yeah.
It's not the first or second reason I'm out there. You want justice. You want good things to happen. But I'd be lying to you to say it wasn't a therapeutic aspect to these incredible young people who are in the street, who are saying no to Goliath.
Yeah.
And you get that a lot. And I think restoring hope is really important, because if you're going to live to fight another day, you have to have hope as a prerequisite to fight another day. So in some regard, that's why I love interviewing people on the street, because I also believe that they're like, we make it so you have to be this great person. History makes it. I got to be Martin Luther King. Well, who could be an orator like Martin Luther King? I can't. 99% of the people can't. You have to be someone special. No, not really. Not really. There's special people in the street at every protest I've ever been at. Why not listen to their voice rather than someone who's lying to you on TV because they're police or they're military or politician? Why do we got to be a politician when we know the movements that have changed the world have come from the people? So, I always say in the civil rights movement, my favorite story has always been the Greensboro Four, because the Greensboro Four, they just said, I'm not going to take it anymore. And they sat down at that Woolworth, and by the end of the week, there were hundreds of people sitting doing the sit-ins at the counters and the restaurants. And by the end of the year, there were thousands, right? And that was just four regular people said I had enough, you know? And the more you go out and the more you really see how change happens, it's just regular people. So we have to be empowered by regular people in the streets. And if you think you got to be a celebrity, or if you think you got to be Martin Luther King or some great orator or something like that, that seems too far away from you. That doesn't seem touchable. So for me, I love interviewing the brilliant minds that are just in the streets, and they're in every street at every protest.
Yeah. That's one thing, one of many things for me also that's been inspiring, like being uh, in community with, people in the movement, like activists, organizers, because it is that I was watching a video yesterday of Angela Davis in Birmingham from 2019, where she was supposed to receive a reward. It was taken away because of her pro-Palestine stance, and then it was given back to her, and then she was interviewed. And in the interview, she said what you're saying. She's like, I'm only here because people fought for me when, I was jailed. And if people hadn't fought for
Yeah.
me, I wouldn't have been in a place to use my voice and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And so I think, it's like people having a voice, being able to, I love that you ask questions, and because people need to feel heard, people should be heard, especially when they're mobilized in for something. And what I know this from understanding media training is, like, mass media like MSNBC, CNN, Fox, like, it's all about talking points. And no matter what you're
Yeah.
asked, you got to bring it back to the talking point. And so there's not real conversations and dialogue happening. And I remember you played there was a video that you played after the screening, uh, that you would put together, where you were interviewing people on the street, and just how powerful that was.
Yeah. Yeah. People are amazing. I'm really I'm not even just saying it. I'm like honestly amazed at the people that I meet. Like, I mean, and the first thing is, usually the people on any topic are the most informed. I'm not saying everyone, but they're organizers, like, who know so much about a topic. And I never go to a protest and not learn something. They'll tell you budget details,
Yeah.
they'll tell you history. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And as a journalist, I have to go back home and, you know, fact check a little
Yep.
bit. And I'll go down a rabbit hole. I said, oh my goodness, I had no idea. I mean, I could give you 20 examples, but I'll give you one quick one. When Trump was president, on the ninth day, I thought there was this incredible, white liberal awakening, because there were thousands of people in the street saying no Muslim ban, no wall. And I'm sitting here like, this is beautiful. We were taking down airport. We were going into airports, flooding them. No Muslim ban, no wall. The majority are white liberals, by the way. Oh, are we hitting this awakening? Right. So then let's fast forward 4 years. 21 days into Joe Biden's presidency, I get a text that say, hey, could you cover this protest? They're deporting thousands of Haitians, 21 days. And in my mind, I said, how is that possible? Because Joe Biden said on TV that there's a 100-day moratorium on all deportations. And I believed him. And most people believed him.
Mhm.
And they said, wait a second. Trump and Stephen Miller put together a Title 42. And through this loophole, they are getting rid of deporting thousands of Haitians. So I go down there, and I'm like, oh my God, it's true. I'm interviewing the people. I'm learning all this myself. First time I ever heard of Title 42. Many more people know it now. But when I tweeted the same thing, many of the people who loved me during
Yeah.
Trump's presidency, and said, great, no Muslim ban, no wall, I wasn't getting the same reaction. I wasn't getting the same volume of retweets at all. And then people who used to love me were saying, I think it's too soon for you to bring. It's only 21 days in his presidency. I'm like, is it too soon for the thousands of Haitians who are being deported? Do you want to tell them and their families? Because in 2 more weeks, it'll be a few more thousand. And, it's very clarifying, what happened in these presidencies, from a protest perspective. Like, Joe Biden was a sedative. He was an
Yeah.
absolute sedative
Yeah.
to a
That's a great.
protest movement. But yeah. And why do some people, why were you against policing in 2020, but all of a sudden you flipped and you changed it? And now you're even saying things mimicking Biden, saying fund the police. So what is your stance? And that's when you start getting into this political tribalism, which gets so dispiriting.
Yeah. Wow. That's so. Yeah. I wanted to ask because it's like you're out there, you're filming, right?
Yeah.
You're collecting what's happening, like what's actually happening. There's not like you're not editing it in ways that it's like biased, right? It's not like it's just here's what's happening. And I was curious, I am gonna ask, like, do you get blowback and do you get pushback? And I know like in this instance, yes, but I'm curious like what that's like.
Of course I do. And let me say, so bias is this tricky word. I
Yeah,
claim bias, but not in a. I'm not going to put a fact that's not factual.
right.
But I'm very open that I am here for the point of view of the marginalized person who's been impacted. I'm not trying to interview a police officer to get their opinion on the matter. I already know what they stand for. It's been very clear. So I have a point of view, but I could defend that point of view. So because I would argue everyone is biased, right? Anytime you have a clip, anytime we watch the news, it doesn't matter if Walter Cronkite, they have to select an angle, right? They have to pick some. Just by the nature of editing a story, you are putting your bias
Yep.
forward. So rather than there's a man who wrote A View from Somewhere, that everybody has an angle and everyone has a point of view. So I'm going to be very honest. My point of view is, say, policing is wrong. It's on the border and human rights crime, and I could defend why that is. If I say police lie, I could defend why that is, and I'm going to get the point of view of those impacted by this policing, by what I believe are domestic human rights crimes. So if I am interviewing Palestinians, yeah, I'm going to interview them, but I have no desire to go interview Zionists. I really don't. There's a genocide going on. So I think it's about everybody being clear that we have a point of view, but can you factually defend your point of view based on truth and justice? I believe that I can, and I will. And I don't believe anyone on corporate TV could defend their point of view based on truth and justice while they're committing a genocide
Yeah.
and complicit in that genocide.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really important point because I'm always like, people should be able to document and present, and there are a lot of instances where that gets used, falsely to influence people. And there's what was the documentary, the mules, the 20,000 mules, or what, what I forget the name, but there's a lot of examples of that. But what you're saying is, which I agree with, is you got to be able to back it up factually. And we have, because of alternative facts and that sort
Yeah.
of thing, like it seems like it's not as easy to know, or for most people to be able to clearly know what is factual and what's not, and what's truth
Yeah.
and what's not.
Like, I mean, take your film. Take your film, Matthew. You have a thesis and you're trying to prove your thesis. I am sure 90% of your interviews, they don't say cutting room floor anymore. I know that doesn't exist, but we used to say hit the
Yeah.
cutting room floor. You don't
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
cut like that anymore, tape. But didn't make the film because you wanted to have a coherent thesis. And I am sure, and I know this as a videographer, it killed you to leave certain parts out of that film. That
Yeah.
that you wanted it in there so bad. And it's the hardest part is shortening your film because you wanted that interview in there, but some it had to go. But in that process, you're still making editorial decisions.
Yeah. I mean, there was a part that I left in, honestly, if we're talking about bias, that I hate that I left it in, but I had
Yeah.
to because of integrity and because it would be, uh, it wouldn't be uh, factual if I would have taken it out. And it's when
Okay.
uh, District Attorney George Gascon, when he's talking about, we've defunded the police, I'm sorry, we've defunded uh, education, we've defunded healthcare, we've defunded housing, we've been, perfectly happy defunding all of this, but yet we haven't had any real conversations about defunding police and putting that into resources. And so when people watch that, they're like, yeah, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And then he says, but to talk about getting rid of the police completely or defunding them to the point where they're ineffective, I completely disagree with that.
Right,
And
right.
and
I see what you're saying.
in
If you
certain
left that last part out, you
yeah,
wouldn't be true to what he said.
yeah. And you
I
can
could understand that. That would be something I would leave in
yeah,
because it's cheating his full thought. I
yeah.
get that. I
Yeah.
get that.
And I can feel it in the room with certain audiences where they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, oh shit.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and it's honest and it's factual. And I think it also
sure.
helps certain viewers be like, oh, okay, this makes sense. You know,
That's right.
yeah. So it's yeah, it is stuff like that. It's really interesting. And yeah, for sure. I before we get into this last part, I just wanted to ask, how can people reach you? What's the best way to connect with what you're doing?
So normally I'm doing some writing and sports writing in other places, but not currently. But you could find me at Chuck Mo D1 on X, they call it now, on IG. I think I just last week, everyone's been saying for years, you need to get on TikTok. You need to get on TikTok
Yeah,
because everyone was taking my videos and they were just putting them on
yeah, yeah.
TikTok. They're like, you may be the one, should be the one, and they're getting all these views. So I just joined TikTok and gonna look to to post there and really get the word out of what's happening on the streets. So I try to cover DC for the most part. Stay here. I've been many other places, of course, Standing Rock, Ferguson, Charlottesville, what have you. But I try to keep it in DC for the most part.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, cool. And then so just two final things. I know uh before we started, uh we had talked about really wanting to make the connection between the cop cities
Yes.
and IDF
Yeah.
and yeah, so I wanted to give you the
Yeah. So
opportunity.
I was in the streets. I was covering another police terror protest, and someone for Jewish Voice for Peace came to me. I think this is like 2019, maybe 2018, I can't remember. And they start telling me about the deadly exchange. I'm like, what what's this deadly exchange you're talking about? And you could find it online. It's a 58-page report. Jewish Voice for Peace and some other organizations, and they started documenting how all the police chiefs and often mayors and often other high-ranking police officials go to Israel and they train and they get their tactics and they utilize their tactics here back at home. So people might be shocked when I tell you every single police chief of every major metropolitan area has gone to train in Israel. And they bring surveillance tactics back. In Atlanta, they're the most surveilled place in the world, city in the world. They bring military mindset, brutal tactics of how to treat pretty much mostly black and brown people in America who are poor, like Palestinians in Gaza. That the open air prison that is in Gaza, we're forming and have been forming open air prisons in many ways here in America where people don't leave their community and it's a military zone. And it's only going to get worse. And the reason it's only going to get worse is that at the present time, there are at least 69 planned cop cities. And I'm going to cite Renee Johnston, who's done incredible work. You know, Renee, we were on the
Yeah.
panel. She
She
organized that
she actually
panel.
took it's up to 82 or 83 now. I just had her
So it's up
on.
to
Yeah.
83. And she's done incredible research. And her research, she really had to dig into newspapers and she put a whole Excel spreadsheet together. This is not something that they talk about on CNN. And what's amazing about these cop cities is that crime overall is down all across America. Well, if crime is down all across America and we have starving budgets and collapsing bridges and infrastructure falling apart, why are you funding more police? And part of the reason is the uprising in 2020 that
Mhm.
was everywhere. That in many ways, what you're seeing in Atlanta and the Stop Cop City movement, to stop their cop city, was a response to this. They were trying to control protesters. And the other big key that's a little different historically is that these cop cities are often incredibly privately funded, sometimes two-thirds privately funded. So imagine you're a mayor, and this is not a right-wing leadership in Atlanta, right? This is a Democratic, predominantly Black DC Atlantic Council, the Black mayor, Democrat, and Home Depot and others, and the Atlanta Police Foundation throwing billions at you and saying, hey, build this cop city, and we're going to fund most of it, which is a whole nother dimension.
Yeah.
We're going to fund most of it. It's hard to say no to that. So we find the distance between Andre Dickens, Democrat, and Brian Kemp are on the same page when it comes to cop cities. In fact, they actually, had a champagne dinner together, and they were talking about this, and billionaires were at the table. So, there are enough billions to buy out anyone. So what's so dangerous about the cop cities is that it's bipartisan fascism. And when you have bipartisan fascism, it's dangerous because there's no mass fight against it. If you have partisan fascism, right, you're going to have, we saw during Trump years, we had a robust protest movement against that fascism. But when there's bipartisan fascism, you have all the liberals will clap as Biden says, fund the police. And they won't do anything about the cop cities. And I can't think of anything that is more fascist than what could be an irreversible police state that is going to mimic mini Gazas all across America. And the people who are on the cutting edge of understanding this, who taught me, are in Atlanta. And why are they in Atlanta? They're in Atlanta because they've already had the Gilley program, Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, going on for 20 years. And that kit was born out of the 1996 Olympics. Those Olympics, and they're doing something in Paris right now. They build these militaristic structures and forces. And when the Olympics are over, they want to keep the riffraff out, racism and all of that. Those entities stay. In fact, that just happened in Paris this week. There was an announcement, all those military that were there and these surveillance tactics and cameras that were there, they're going to keep them. So what's happened, and those officers in the Gilley program have been going to Israel 20 years, and you go on the website, they'll be saying glowing things about what they learned in Israel and that they brought back. So you have this history in Atlanta said, no, we're not doing this. So you had forest defenders delay a movement for a couple of years. They're trying to delay this movement. And the hats off to Atlanta protesters, because what they're doing is proactive instead of reactive. In policing, we're used to reactive movements. We see Michael Brown gets killed, we get in the street. We see Freddie Gray, we get in the street. We see George Floyd, we get in the street. They said, what? You're going to build a multi-million-dollar private cop city? We're going to stop it before it's being built. So they're on some real organizing stuff, but they are the blueprint that must happen all across the country, because it is not going to happen through any politician of any of the major parties. That's already been established. It must happen from the people.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Just to end off, one of my goals with this podcast is really to give a clear picture of what's possible when we are liberated, when we, find ways to divest from the system, from the various systems. And so from your perspective, doing what you do, knowing what you know, what does liberation look like and how do we get there?
Oh, that's an easy question, Matthew. I have the answer for you wrapped up in a bow. I don't have any neat answer, but I know we have to try, right?
Yeah.
And I know that most change comes from 364 days of the year besides election day. And I would say right-wingers and the white supremacist crowd, they understand this very well. They're moving 365 days. And there's something about the Democratic Party, liberal, that a lie has been sold. We're your savior. Vote for us one day and sit back, and Obama, do your magic. Joe Biden, do your magic. Kamala, do your magic. Change doesn't work that way. And people have to hold their elected officials accountable, no matter what party they're in. They have to fight 364 days a year. If you think we're over-policed and we have a militarized policing, you have to fight it no matter who's in power. If you think we need to stop a genocide, we have to fight it no matter who's in power. So I'm focusing on those two because I think those are the two biggest. I believe the cop cities are the biggest domestic issue and human rights crime that's going on in America, and I could list 20 others. I believe, the genocide that United States is funding. I'm not dismissing other genocides, but United States isn't directly funding, every genocide, but they're
Mhm.
funding this one. So we just have to create the world that we want. And you see these in pockets, right? When I was covering the George Washington University encampments, it was beautiful. Like I fell in love. Food was free. Everyone
Mm.
got free food, healthy food. There was political education. On the night before the police tore the encampment down, they were showing the Battle of Algiers at midnight, and you had 50 young people
Mm.
who are watching it. We should get your film at these encampments and show it. There were classes every day on the grass in the university, political education that wasn't happening in the dorm of the school by the professors. And they were creating their own education with actual facts, because they discovered and they were disillusioned that their universities were in bed with weapons manufacturers at a level that I had no idea a year ago.
Yeah.
That a level that's almost irreversible. That the Department of Defense is embedded, and they're embedded for two reasons. One, they're embedded because of getting deals with weapons manufacturing, private investments. But the part that people miss is that the reason Department of Defense is so embedded is that they could get cheap labor through interns. So if they get a
Mm.
professor of Howard, for instance, who has $100 million contract with Department of Defense and is being touted as some great racial pioneering thing, HBCU now gets this money to help kill Palestinians better. What they're doing is they're going to the computer science department and the computer engineering department, and they're working with the professors, and those professors have free labor with the interns. And those interns are helping to build better technology and bombs to kill Palestinians and eventually being used in America. And I didn't know, to be honest with you, until I was interviewing protesters, it never occurred to me the free labor part, the internship part.
Yeah.
And that's why Department of Defense is so embedded in the university, because they're kind of getting unpaid labor to build those weapons.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I was in Boston for a screening and I went to the MIT encampment and
Ooh,
spent some time there, and it was awesome. Like I mean, it was everybody was chill, like they had computers set up, they were doing movies, and they had books laying around. Alex's book was laying around, and a
Alex's
policing.
book was there. We had a
Yeah.
liberation library in GW.
Yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah. So
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. So it's it's
It was
it's the
amazing.
people. Yeah,
It was the people. So you see these pockets of this new world, and that those pockets are inspiring enough because the young people are saying we want a different world that's not based on greed, that's not based on profit, that's not based on capitalism, that's not based on billionaires. That we can create a different world, and you see these glimpses of it, and it's quite inspiring until the police shut it down.
yeah, yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor to have you, and I really appreciate not your time today and all the work that you do. It's really inspiring, and it keeps us going. So thank you.
I appreciate it too. Now, we know that there are a lot of new laws that are inhibiting the encampments. Well, if they get started again, we got to get your film in those universities, on the lawn, on that big projector screen.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
right.
all for that. All right.
Beautiful.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening in. It was really such an honor to have Chuck Modiano on. Please follow him on Instagram and X at Chuck Modi1. Chuck Modi and the number one. We'll put that in the show notes. That's the best way to follow him. And as he said, he's on TikTok now. So yeah, make sure you follow him. Go watch Reimagining Safety. ReimaginingSafetyMovie.com is the website. Make sure you follow, subscribe, and like Conversations for the People. Do all those things because that's really important so we can keep going. And until next time, all power to the people.